Get started. Thank you, and welcome everyone to our Workshop Wednesdays webinar series. Happy to have you guys on this afternoon or this morning, whatever time it is, wherever you're calling in from. As you just heard, this webinar will be recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel. My colleague Sean, who's on the line, will post the link to our YouTube careers playlist, so you know where to find this recording that will be posted next month, as well as all of our other previous webinars that we've recorded. And don't worry, a follow-up email will be sent with that link again, along with some other information. We will not have slides today. This will be more of a conversational webinar. So happy to have you guys join in our little conversation here. And with that, we do have a Q&A box. So if you do have any questions along the way for either of our panelists, feel free to use the Q&A box for that. Sean, again, will be monitoring those Q&As. So any questions that he can answer, he'll answer by text. But we may even be able to get to a few of your questions verbally that we'll be able to ask the panelists at the end of our discussion. So make them good. So before we start, my name is Marla Lazarus. I work in the Division of Global Hiring and Outreach within the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And for those who may not be familiar with CMS at all, I just want to give you a very, very brief overview of CMS. So we are responsible for the Medicare, Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, as well as the federal health insurance exchanges. So we oversee all of those programs. Combined, those programs touch the lives of over 145 million Americans. Within CMS, we have 25 or so different hiring departments. We have 10 regional offices around the country as well. So we are headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland. We have a small office in DC, a small office in Bethesda, Maryland, and then we have 10 regional offices in different cities across the country as well. The types of positions that we hire for really are very varied. So we hire everything from health administration and policy. We hire media and communication specialists. We hire people with a business or finance background. We hire program support type folks, technology. We hire a lot of IT folks, and math, science, kind of STEM in general. So we have a lot of different positions that we hire for. Very, very excited today because we have panelists from two completely different fields within CMS. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists today. Today we have Juanita Wilson, who is the director of our Medicare Support Contract Group within the Office of Acquisition and Grants Management. And we also have Frank DeMizio, who is our deputy director of the Information Security and Privacy Group within the Office of Information Technology. So within CMS, a lot of people think of us as like a health policy focused organization, which we absolutely are. But we really wanted to highlight today some folks who aren't in the health policy arena. So we have a representative from our kind of contracts and grants field, and then also from our IT cyber field. So just wanted to make it known to everybody that we are definitely health policy, but we are way more than just health policy. So with that, I want to give Frank and Juanita both a minute or two to introduce yourselves, kind of where you work, what you do, how long you've been with CMS, if you had a life before CMS, interested to hear about where you came from. So Juanita, we will start with you.
All right. Good afternoon. And thanks, Marla, for the opportunity to take part and participate on this panel. As Marla mentioned, I am in the Office of Acquisition and Grants Management, the Medicare Support Contracts Group, and we're kind of customer centric in OAGM. So I handle the Centers for Medicare, the office that oversees the Affordable Care Act and the federal exchanges, as well as a few other ancillary programs. But that's a huge chunk of customers within OAGM, and we're basically hiring contracting officers and contract specialists, which most folks hear that and think just business related, but it's much more than that. Various disciplines can be well suited for this career field. I've been at CMS for, wow, I think 24 years now. prior to that, I was at headquarters for the Department of Energy in Washington, D.C. I'm a native Washingtonian, so that's always a fun fact just because there's lots of transients in the DMV area. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll turn it over to Frank.
Thank you. Yep. So Frank DeVizio, like Marla said, the Office of Information Technology. So our group specializes in cybersecurity and privacy issues. So day to day, we are dealing with breaches of beneficiaries' information. We are dealing with the security around all the medical information that CMS has, all the patient information, and ensuring that we share that information properly across different federal partners. And so there's a lot of facets. I feel like I'm okay in saying that we are growing. The information security space in CMS is growing. And so we are looking to bring on contracts folks, kind of like old school IT security, firewall people, policy, cybersecurity policy, privacy policy experts, counterintelligence. Like there's a gamut of things that information security and privacy group handles. And so for me, I've been here with CMS just over 4 years, and I come from a law enforcement background. I was a police officer for 20 years in Philadelphia. I'm not a native to this area, and but I live here now. And then between retiring and this position, I held several roles within the contract space in government, working for DHS and SSA and some other agencies. And I'll say, the thing that drew me to CMS is the thing that Marla kind of alluded to is 150 million Americans. That's a big responsibility, and we have a lot of reach. And I think that that the work that we do is important, and so that's what brought me here.
That's awesome. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Juanita, for sharing a little bit about yourself. What I realized I did not share at the beginning was what we are here to talk about today. So hopefully the audience knew a little bit about that. But so what we are here to really talk about. So as a recruiter, we hear all the time, like, what is a manager looking for? I've applied several times. I'm not getting a call for an interview. What can I do to increase my chances? How can I make my resume stand out? All of those types of questions we hear all the time as recruiters. So we decided to put together this webinar to talk to hiring managers that do interviews and hire people all of the time to find out the answer to that question. So the premise of this discussion will really revolve around the fact that let's say you've applied to positions, or there's a posting out there, people have applied, HR has done their review, and however they do it for that particular hiring authority, the manager, in this case Juanita and Frank, get a certificate of eligible applicants, which in the government we call a cert or a cert list. And then what, right? So how do they decide who they call for interviews, who they put to the side, what turns them off, what they're attracted to in an application? So that's really the premise of this conversation today, and it will be more of a conversation. So again, feel free as questions arise, feel free to use the Q&A to ask any of those questions that you may want to get clarity on from Juanita and Frank, and we will try to get to as many as we can at the end. So the first question I have for both of you, and we will start with Juanita again, is for you, what makes a candidate stand out on paper?
Well, that's a good question, because as you mentioned with the federal cert, sometimes literally we get hundreds, 200-300 candidates, and we only have, fairly a short amount of time to go through them. So the resume is the first hurdle. And managers, as we're going through them, what I find to be helpful is the resume being kind of well presented, format style with subheadings and clear highlights of some of your bigger accomplishments or specific projects. So demonstrating the technical accomplishments instead of just listing responsibilities, ensuring that it's quantified by numbers, especially in contracts lingo, right? What's important to us are numbers, percentages, dollar amounts of your projects, giving us a glimpse of the type of workload you're able to handle and your level of kind of purview, customer base, or how many folks are on your team, et cetera. Really highlighting not just a title of a project, but why it was complex or highly visible, what was really noteworthy about that work and experience. It's not very appealing to me if I'm looking at a very exhaustive, long resume that's jumbled formatting. Like I just can't really read past, there's no magical page limit, but I must say that if you can concisely put your comprehensive information in no more than around 3 or 4 pages, that would be great. On the flip side, some folks, especially who may not be familiar with the federal hiring practices or information, they will give just a 1 or 2 pager of very high bulleted information. And that does not really work well or to your advantage, because we have to first schedule the interview before you can elaborate. What I hear a lot of times from folks from private industry, they'll say, oh, well, I do a short resume and I'll elaborate at the interview. Well, you might not get an interview based upon the very short resume, right? So dozens of times at an interview, we'll hear about this great experience or these great projects that were never mentioned in their resume. And so you really want to make sure you get, through the first hurdle and make sure that your resume is concise, but yet comprehensive. And just, giving a glimpse of you being a well-rounded applicant. So not just technical skills, but, are there any leadership projects or that you're interested in participating in office or agency-wide initiatives? So I don't want to steal all of the time, so I guess I'll turn it over to Frank.
Yeah, thank you. And so I would agree with everything that you just said. I think, I'll just restate it because I think it's important. Hundreds of resumes, right? And so like our positions are typically what we call direct hire positions. And so we don't get a cert list like Marla was talking about. We get every resume. And so hundreds. And so, I think with that in mind, I love to see 3 to 5 bullets, at the top of the resume of the things that you really want me to know, right? What have you done that you're what are you super proud of, and so, whether that's, you have a master's degree or, a project that you worked on, just something to, because as we go through, just that would kind of catch my eye, right? That's something that I think is, I love to see that, right? I love to see where we're at, right up at the top. And then I think, it's very effective to have a combination of bullets and narrative in your work history. So again, right, maybe another 3 things that you really want me to know about what you did, and then a description so I could dive in a little bit deeper, right? I think that is really helpful to kind of, to get to get my hands around what the types of experience and the types of work that you've done. And I'll say, I think specifically around technology hires, right? Because that's what I do. People have a tendency to do like a keyword thing. And so like every technology that you've ever heard of or dealt with or anything like that. And so, that as far as I can tell, we don't use any kind of keyword thing to identify resumes. And so like that's, to me, that's almost wasted space for you, like for us, right? Like, because I'm not going to sit and read a whole list of technologies. But like that could be, what are your goals? What are, more bullets of accomplishments? There's a lot of space there, I think, where we could really like kind of dive in and share. You could share more information about yourself.
Marla, can I add a few more things that Frank's comments kind of triggered?
Absolutely.
So in the contracting field, we're also fortunate enough to have direct hire authority. And depending upon the GS level that's being announced within that vacancy, this may be a career shift for some folks. And in those cases, we would really like you to first be familiar with what the position is, and you can find very good descriptions on OPM's website, but then try to highlight how your skills are transferable to this position, because that's what we'll want you to also elaborate on in the interview. As I mentioned, people hear contracting and they automatically think, oh, well, I wasn't a business major, I don't have an MBA. There are like 11 core fields, many disciplines. I mean, I was a psychology and sociology undergraduate major, but my master's is in public policy, health policy. So it's a wide array of career fields that can do this job. It's just you need to have, good certain foundational things in play. But we just don't want that to automatically deter you. Just hearing that kind of contracts term, but really just kind of strong strategic analytical skills, problem solving, good judgment, and being research oriented. And as Frank mentioned, please don't just Google and put in a bunch of technical terms that you're not familiar with, because we will ask you to elaborate, and there's really nothing worse than saying, hey, I do cost analysis. And then when someone asks you like what techniques or blah, 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 and you can't really explain it, it doesn't fare well. So please don't put anything in your resume that you're not familiar with or you can't explain. So that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
So one last thing. I think, so for people, career changers, like I was a career changer, right? At entry level, I think, when you're thinking about writing, like, what the work that you did, for me, so there's probably a limited amount of jobs that you've had that didn't involve some kind of tech, right? And so if you were, so like my first job was as a stocker at Kmart, right? And so describing how I stock shelves is not really relevant to the job that I have now, but describing the tech that I used, right, may be, right? And so however you were involved in tech in the roles that you've held, I think is super relevant, and I think that's that is something I would say makes people stand out, right? Like taking the time to go through older, their work history and pick out the pieces that are actually relevant to the topic that's at hand.
Wow. Gosh, I feel like I chose you guys really well, because I took a bunch of nuggets just from the first question. I'm not taking any credit for your expertise, but I mean, I did kind of cheat you. Anyway, so just to recap, for everybody that's on the line, I think there was such valuable information. I just want to kind of summarize and point out some of the wonderful points that Juanita and Frank made. So one, highlighting your accomplishments. That's one of the things we promote as recruiters, including in your resume, is to pull out those accomplishments and make sure you highlight those. Juanita mentioned 3 to 4 pages. We recommend 3 to 5. Again, that's not a hard and fast number. It doesn't mean you can't go over 5. Doesn't mean it can't be under 3. But making a resume palatable to a manager that has an unknown quantity of resumes to go through is very important. Highlighting experience outside of technical skills. So some of those softer skills that Juanita was talking about, super important as well. Frank mentioned kind of giving a summary. If your experience lends itself to including a little summary, that's helpful for managers at times. And then both of them really mentioned those transferable skill sets. So pulling out those skill sets that may not be directly related to the position you're applying to, but can lend itself to the position you're applying to, so important. So thank you both for that very, very all-inclusive answers you gave. That was very helpful. So next question is, one thing I wanted to highlight, both of them mentioned direct hire authorities. So those of you on the line may not be very familiar with federal employment. So just wanted to touch on that for one quick second before we go on to the next question. There are certain positions within the federal government that is afforded what we call direct hire authority. It is a slightly more streamlined way to hire candidates into harder to fill positions that might have a history of the skill sets might not be as readily available in certain areas. So the government gives us this direct hire authority to use. In those cases, in which happens to be Frank and both Frank and Juanita's cases in cybersecurity and contracting, they have direct hire authority, which basically means a lot of times, as they mentioned, they will get the entire list of candidates that apply, as opposed to an already filtered down HR going through and rating a best qualified list. So that's what they mean. A lot of times they are getting hundreds and hundreds of applications at once. So just wanted to point that out. For the vast majority of our other positions at CMS, direct hire authority is not granted. So we do have most of our positions are rated and ranked by HR specialists. But I will say, to Frank's point, there is no keyword searching within our software. So don't think you have to go in and put certain keywords in that our software is going to pick up. That is not how it works with our resume application software. So with that, I will go into the next question. So based on the hundreds of probably multiple thousands of resumes you've seen probably just in the last year or two, based on that, what are some things you would suggest that applicants avoid in their resume? And Frank, I will start with you on this one.
Yeah, so I think and I think Juanita hit on this too. The couple of the resumes that stand out to me that were so, there you read resumes of applicants that are, they're just not qualified, right? And that's okay. But I think I've encountered a strange number of resumes that where the person may have been qualified, but it was so the one that really stayed, it was 16 pages. It was a 16-page resume. And so I'm not really sure what to do with that, right? Is this, in the grand scheme of everything, taking that, digesting, being able to really digest 16 pages amongst 400 resumes is really kind of difficult. And so, I would say, if you have that much experience, because I have a long resume, right? I've been in the workforce quite some time. But I think cutting down positions that maybe aren't directly relevant, or when I mentioned bullets and narrative, maybe not bullets and narrative for every position, right? Maybe the ones that are relevant. And I know I guess this is subjective, but so I don't particularly I'm not honing in on gaps in employment, right? So if you have if you have a gap or you don't have a gap, right? If the gap is actually a time being unemployed, I guess, or if the gap is just something that you left out in the, in the effort to get your resume into a readable state, I think, like I don't, that's not something to me that affects one way or the other. Like I'm looking for the information basically that you want me to know. And so that, that may be like a little way to get yourself down the road on that. And then I think, so I mentioned like the list of keywords. I think that is really kind of not necessary. And then really like just on the basic level, folks are busy and like, misspellings, like don't really I guess I don't get really wrapped around the axle about it, but like, I think, when it comes down to who we're going to interview for this role, and and I only have so much time to conduct interviews in my day, so, and I have 8 in front of me and I have to get it to 5. That could be the differentiator, and so like I rely on spell check and the little squiggly underlines more than anybody I know, but kind of paying attention to that and taking the time, it shows that to me that the candidate is really interested in this role, right, and really is kind of taking it seriously, as opposed to somebody that's firing things off and really maybe taking the shotgun approach to applying to federal positions.
Yeah, so I would say we slightly have a different approach on some of these. I definitely want an explanation of gaps in service. And I pay close attention, not overly, but to me, the resume is my first impression of you. So if I were to meet you on an elevator or that's kind of the resume to me in written format, right? So if there are grammatical errors, or like Frank mentioned, it's very easy to do spell check or to get someone else to read through your resume before submitting it. If you're misspelling contract specialist, right? I mean, we've seen it all, and not to belittle those types of mistakes, but especially in our field, it matters. Written documentation, attention to detail, being able to present a work product, finding the right balance between taking a lot of information and concisely and clearly conveying it is critical to the position itself, right? So I look at every juncture in the hiring process as kind of a little glimpse as to how you would approach your work. So the resume is a glimpse of how your file or your documentation may look. When we're communicating before or after the fact about follow-up things, how fast are you responding to me? How clear are your emails? Like every touch point I view as, hey, this is giving me a little more insight. So you just want to make sure that you're kind of putting your best foot forward. And as Marla mentioned, as I was reading through my notes for number 2, I'm like, heck, I almost mentioned all of this in number 1, but just a few more points that I'll reiterate is making sure you give us, comprehensive examples or why something is being highlighted, like what was so noteworthy about it. And not selling yourself short on providing enough detail, because as we're going through these quickly, it doesn't mean that we're not reading them, but there has to be a hook, if you will, on the first page that kind of wants us reading more. And just view it as, your goal isn't to simply just show us that you can do the work, but that you excel above any other applicant. So you should be leaving me wanting to read more, wanting to talk to you more about your experience.
Yeah, and Juanita brought up a good point too. I think, so in the beginning, she mentioned something about, like the grammar, especially as it relates to like your expertise. I think, is something that, and especially in tech, right? We have certain, things like we shorten stuff and so like I could recall someone's resume telling me that they were an expert in O360. And so like I know that means Office 365, but do you know that? Like, are you really an expert? Like, that leaves me with questions, right? Like, I don't know that's how, that's how it should go. And also, these fields that we're dealing with are huge. And so, I have expertise in some areas of cybersecurity and less expertise in other areas of cybersecurity. And so I may not know the acronym that you're tossing at me. And so it's better to not leave that up to chance. Because like I'm going to be honest, like the number of resumes where I'm going to start Googling, like what did this person mean when they say like that's going to be few and far between, right? So you're making sure that acronyms are spelled out, the abbreviations are spelled out. I think is something, especially for tech resumes. I think that's very important to highlight.
Totally agree. Great information. Juanita, did you have another point?
I do. I'm sorry. And it's just an overall point. I'm not sure if it fits into a bucket of a specific question, but as we mentioned, we have direct hire authority, and not sure if Frank has had this experience or not, but sometimes with our field, we may be looking specifically for folks with a contracting officer warrant, that, you're the only ones that can obligate the federal dollars. And on several occasions, we have reached out to like our HR department, Marla and Company, to, try to even reach folks on social media, looking at LinkedIn pages, if anyone is mentioning that, et cetera. And I have to tell you, we reach out via HR and we just don't get any responses. You know how I guess in LinkedIn you have to accept the invitation or whatever. And, so I would just say, I think we're all a little guilty of, letting some of the notifications in LinkedIn sit there for a little while, but don't have a LinkedIn or social media if you're never going to check it, right? And if you are going to check it, at least try to be, a little cognizant or aware of some of those inquiries coming in. Because, it is a little frustrating when we try to reach out to find that expertise and we just, we don't get any responses, so.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Juanita. And that's actually a perfect segue. I'm going to call a slight audible here. So we got a question in the Q&A box, and it has to do with LinkedIn. And so I know, Juanita, you mentioned as recruiters, we help hiring managers kind of screen LinkedIn and try to find appropriate candidates for your positions. But as hiring managers, how important are LinkedIn profiles to you? Do you ever go to LinkedIn after you've decided like who you're going to interview, or at any point in the process? Are you ever checking LinkedIn to look at potential candidates?
Did you want me to go first? I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yes, Juanita, go.
Okay, no problem. Yes, now I'm not the most tech savvy, but I am on LinkedIn. It's not the most robust profile, but on my management team, like we have some pretty savvy folks. We do check LinkedIn on our own as well. And so I would say as a cursory, or if we're really looking for, as I mentioned, someone with a warrant, right? That's the easiest way for us to kind of find that, because there's no like magical federal government database where I can just go in and search for contracting officers, right? And sometimes what I'm trying to see is, are there any current federal employees that have a warrant that may be looking for career opportunities before I go out with an exhaustive brand new vacancy announcement and trying to sift through 300 applicants to find that, because it's much easier, sometimes for me to make a lateral transfer if someone has that expertise. So, the easier you make it for us to find that information, the better. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a standard operating procedure for us to always check it, but when we're looking for specific expertise, we do.
No. Frank, how about you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I use LinkedIn a lot, all the time. Like I'm not currently looking for a new job or anything, but like I'm literally on there on a daily basis. And so, like, I think depending on the role, right? Depending on so it's important for me, I think, especially as you climb the ladder to it. So if you're on LinkedIn, right, you should have it should give me an idea of what you're doing, right? What do you think? And so, and that works both for and against. I think, like if you're sharing relevant content, if you're, commenting, like commenting intelligent things, and like that could really that could play in your advantage. And, the flip side is if you're being, rude and ignorant and, sharing off the wall stuff, like, that could probably somebody I don't want to have on my team. But I think, like I guess I can't overstate like the idea of having a network on LinkedIn. For me, I think, in my career and also as a hiring manager has been huge. Like just, having connections and being able to reach out to somebody that may know somebody for an introduction. I think that is a huge thing. And so, yeah, like I'm not going to continue this LinkedIn commercial anymore, but I really like LinkedIn. I think there's a lot of good stuff to be had, especially, in the information security realm. There's a lot of good people that you could connect to and learn a lot of things there.
It sounds like I may need a tutorial from Frank.
Let's do it. Let's get together and we'll make it happen.
Well, let's go ahead and plug our last webinar that last 2 weeks ago. We did an overview on how to improve and how to use LinkedIn to your advantage for professional reasons. So feel free to visit that link he threw in the chat and watch our webinar from last month where he goes over how to build your LinkedIn profile. So thanks for that, Sean. And thank you both. Definitely took a lot away from that. One of the things I walked away from the last question was kind of just the differences in hiring managers. So a lot of times as recruiters, we get very definite questions about what managers want to see. And we're often telling people that some of this stuff is subjective, right? So while one manager might want to see something one way, another manager might want to prefer it another way. So there's not really a one size fits all. But I think what you are hearing throughout the discussion today is a lot of common themes, right? So mistakes, typos may be not as important to one person as it is to another, but nobody really wants to see any typos, right? Long resumes maybe are daunting to any manager, with the caveat that some professions do kind of maybe not require longer resumes or CVs, but it's more common if you've been published in different publications. A lot of medical professionals, that type of thing, might have a longer CV. We're not really talking about those very specialized professions. We're talking about the common kind of policy, IT, business, contracts, that type of thing. So it applies, let's say, to most positions. And I really like Juanita's point about the resume, really kind of a first look on how the manager will look at what type of work you're going to do, right? So if your resume is poorly put together, poorly structured, well, So goes it to say that that's probably how your work will look as well. So not that attractive to a hiring manager. So with that being said, I want to get on to the next question. And then I do still want to leave some time. We are getting a few questions in. So I want to get some time to leave some time to ask a few questions that are coming from attendees. But this next question is about the interview part of the recruiting process. So with that, it's kind of a two-part question. So what are you trying to learn from an interview? And what, in your opinion, makes an interview successful? And Juanita, I will start with you.
Okay, great. Well, I have a 17-year-old and we're embarking on the whole college admission process, which is stressing us all out. But one thing that is kind of a good comparison to the interview in this case with job applications is what I'm really looking for is kind of a combination during the interview, but more so trying to learn about your personality traits and how you approach your work and conflict. Trying to really get a sense of who you are as a person as well, how you would fit in with the chemistry of my team. Do you like challenges? Are you resilient? Do you have a sense of humor? Are you easily stressed? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people, especially in these technical type of fields, that have the credentials, the FACSI certifications, et cetera. With all of that being equal, what would make you the better choice for me, right? So that's what I'm really trying to get a sense of. And sometimes I think people approach the interview, they're so like nervous and tied up in knots. We really, want you to be relaxed and really have your true self kind of shine through, not getting too comfortable. I have had people curse in interviews, which is definitely a no-no, but we just want you, while you're conveying your experience and expertise, to also give us a glimpse of who you are as a person, and what your work ethic is, what's important to you, as far as what motivates you in your career development.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a great point, right? I think, trying to learn about you, right? Like, so what makes you tick, especially, so, I love cybersecurity, right? Like, I love it. Like, I read about it at night, I read about it during the day, and so, and I don't expect everybody to love it as much as I do, but yeah, I think those are the people that I want to surround myself with, right? The people that also are going to enjoy our day to day, right? It's not always enjoyable, but and so taking that nervousness into account, because I'll be the first one to say, like, I get nervous during interviews a lot, but like trying to keep in mind, I think we wouldn't be going through the interview process if there wasn't something interesting that we had in common, that a thing that we wanted to move forward with, but also letting your personality shine through, and trying to, so that, like, there's two things that I think, especially in the interviews that we do, that people sometimes miss, right? And so one is like pet projects, side things, right? Like, if you're an IT person, right, there's very little chance that you do IT at work and then, like, you get your pencil and paper out and and aren't involved in any tech in your home, right? And so, like, sometimes you may not have some good experience in something that in a work related thing, but you've read articles and you set up a home lab and you did other things that, and so, like, sometimes that's even more meaningful for me, because you have a 9 to 5, right? Everybody's got responsibilities, and then you took extra steps to increase your knowledge and to learn things, and so like, it's important to not leave those things out. And then I think for the other thing is like, I like to hear about examples, right? More than I like to hear about, how you would handle something. And so, like, for instance, if we're talking about, how you deal with difficult customers or difficult coworkers. And so instead of talking to me about, like something that you may do or you would do, like I would rather you reach back and say, well, I've experienced that in my past, and talk about how you dealt with it. And so, whether you dealt with it successfully or not, right? You learned something. And so, like, even that, like, you don't have to spin, right? Like, yeah, I've dealt with that, and here's how I dealt with it, and it didn't turn out that great, and here's how I critique what I've done. I think, like that, those type of examples are huge for me. Like that's a huge kind of like exclamation point. Like I need to pay attention to this person, right?
Love that. That's such a great point. But such great points both of you made. Just really, taking that nervousness and trying as much as you can to set it aside and just be yourself and show all parts of you in a professional way. As Juanita mentioned and Frank touched on as well. So definitely great point. So I want to bring up one question that we got, and it kind of relates to something Frank mentioned so the question was, what if you're a student with little experience? How can you make your resume stand out? So you mentioned something about taking other points or using your experience, reaching back to your past and using your experience. So that kind of sparked my brain with this question of not just limiting yourself to what you've done, maybe an internship or a work experience, but taking yourself as a whole. So can either of you touch on, maybe Frank, if you want to start, how can a student with little to no experience make yourself stand out? I know neither of you are hiring. Well, Juanita might be hiring at the entry level a little more than Frank, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, on the tech side, like almost anything that you've done, I like, so for like, for some penetration testers, right? You can go online and sign up for what we call capture the flags. And so as an entry level person that has taken a step to do that, right? Like that, I mean, that's those type of things are huge. Or like I mentioned before, setting up, setting up a lab at home to be able to work through some issues so like one of the things I did, when I started learning how to work on computers, and so I went and worked on computers. Like I discount rate, like if your computer's broken, it's already broken. I'm probably not going to break it more. Like, let me help you fix it. So I went to senior centers. I went to there's the union I was in had a an assisted living facility. So I went there and I helped people fix computers. And so, that was just something I did to be able to put hands on to what I was doing. And I think, that tells me something about like the hunger of the person, like the thirst for knowledge, which in for me in tech is everything, right? Because it changes too fast for you to know it. So you have to want to keep up, and you have to kind of enjoy it, or things get stale. And so I think that is those are things that really kind of that stand out for me, like that like showing that passion.
Awesome points. Thanks, Frank. I'm learning so much about you, so much more than I didn't know. Juanita, how?
A little crazy, yeah, I know.
Yeah, for people that might not have a lot of experience, how do you suggest?
Yes, it is. Structured a little bit or approached a little bit differently. I have, hired under the Pathways and Recent Graduates program, as well as when we advertise at the 7 and 9. Normally that's, a lower level that we're not really expecting to see a lot of direct experience. But like anything, if you just came out of college or had a previous job, I do like to see the tie back of the skills we're looking for to whatever experience that was, your internship, even a class where you had to do a group project, and we all know how much we love those. It's the same thing at work, right? You're going to have the doers, you're going to have the somewhat slackers, you're going to have the non-responders. That's everyday life, right? So how did you work through that? Did you just, dig in your heels and wait for the folks that weren't pulling their weight to just come up? Or how did you engage them? How did you try to motivate them? How did you, deal with those challenging environments and still come out at the end with a good product that you could be proud of, right? So you can tie it into lots of experiences, and I'm sorry if you hear my dog scratching in the background. But also, even if you worked in retail, how did you deal with invoicing or inventory? How did were you involved with any kind of analysis on, how to analyze kind of, return on investment or things like that? In your personal life, did you just recently buy a car or a house? Go over kind of your thought process, your research, your comparison. How did you come out with your decision at the end? So there's different ways to kind of twist it, but it just takes a little more thinking about that. So.
Great points and great ideas there for kind of building it out where you might not think to add things to your resume. So thanks to both of you for that, and hope that was helpful to the person that asked that question. So we're wrapping up our last few minutes here. Just want to get to a couple more questions. So the first one has to do with follow-up. So I know a lot of people ask about after the interview, what should I do? Should I send anything? How quickly? How often? So I know we sometimes as hiring managers have people that are maybe a little too aggressive in their follow-up. So wondering what both of you like to see with a follow-up following an interview. So now you've interviewed your cadre of people, you're making the decision. What do you like to see from candidates? So Juanita, I'll start with you.
Okay, so I like follow-ups, but if I don't get a follow-up, it's not that I hold that against anyone either. But if you are going to send a follow-up, sometimes those that stand out a little more, maybe a few days after the interview. But you're also providing us, the interview panel, with feedback, how you felt about the interview, and maybe mentioning something specific that you learned about our program or area that piqued your interest. So, those kind of stand out. And then normally folks at the end of an interview may ask, oh, so what time frame are you planning to make a decision or hire? And if we give you that time frame, then I would say I welcome you following up, right after that time frame, just as a little status check-in. By all means, I would recommend that.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think too. So for me, right, it's kind of like case by case. So like I don't look for like a follow up, but I think that, like Juanita said, like it can be, it can be helpful. I think, the most effective use of that I've seen was, folks that like during the interview, maybe that, they gave a response that they didn't like, or they gave a response, that they wanted to elaborate on. I think, and like a follow-up email to say, hey, I took a day and I thought about what I said, and I'd like to, I'd also like to point out, whatever it may be. to me, like that shows, so you're still thinking about it, right? like you're interested and, are willing to admit, hey, this wasn't the greatest, but, like here's some more ideas that, that kind of float out, not in the, in the hot seat in the middle of an interview. I think that is, that's great. And then, and Juanita mentioned, and I'll just double down on like the idea that, if you learned something during the interview, or like we said something that piqued your interest about CMS, or, about the operation, about what we do, and, and you're able to kind of turn that back around into, yeah. So like you said, CMS's operating budget is over $1 trillion a year. So I went and looked, and, and it is, and here's, here's the OIT budget, and here's you can find all that stuff on the internet. Right. And so that just kind of, speaks to a person that has like a deep interest. So, and I think that's an effective use of that follow-up, the follow-up email note.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. Such great suggestions and points again. Just want to touch on one question before we get to our last one. I will touch on this one. So a question came in about applying for positions. How does a candidate know which GS level they qualify for? So I want to encourage everybody to go back and watch our webinar on the ins and outs of USA Jobs that we held last month. It goes over in depth the qualifications section of a vacancy announcement. And if you look in that qualifications section, you'll see the experience required, and it'll be typically 2 to 3 statements about what experience is required for each grade level. If the announcement is posted with multiple grade levels, it will only have one if it's one grade level. But that is where you'll be able to see whether you possess the experience required for that particular GS level. So that's a really good indicator if you're applying for the right GS level position. And just a note that you will be able to substitute education for those entry level grades. So GS7, GS9, even sometimes GS11, you'll be able to substitute education if you don't have the experience. So just wanted to make that point before we get to our last question. Thank you, Sean, for adding the link to that particular webinar in the chat. So the last question we got in from candidates has to do with cover letters. So how do you feel about them? Do you care about them? Do you like them? Do you read them? Juanita, we'll give you this last one first.
All right. I must say that normally I will gloss over the cover letter unless I read through the resume. And again, if I'm having more questions than answers, I think I had mentioned earlier about gaps in service, or if I've seen you change jobs very frequently. Those are adding a few question marks in my head. I saw someone submit a very good cover letter where I felt as if they were in my mind. The cover letter was explaining why they had changed locations, whether it was, I can't remember if they were military or their spouse was. I mean, it gave me insight and more answers than kind of, reservations, if you will. So if you use the cover letter to really give me almost like a teaser, like a trailer for a movie, little glimpses of what I should hone in on in your resume, then that would be an effective use of the cover letter, or to explain those things that aren't clearly coming through, like gaps in service or multiple changes of jobs in the last, like every 2 years or something. So I know that's normal in private industry, but like in contracts, sometimes we're wondering, well, why? Was it promotion potential? Was it something else? So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree 100%. Right. So I think I skip the cover letter and go and start with the resume. And then, again, like as a deciding factor, as if there's questions, if there's, if we're trying to call the resumes down to a certain number, then, the cover letter may come into play then. But it's not something that I'm looking for first. And, and I'll just kind of reiterate, like it can, if it's not well written, right, because, you can get away with a bulleted resume. You have punctuation stuff and grammar issues and spelling, that could work either way. I think the cover letter could work either way.
So I guess based upon Frank and my response, if there's something really important that you were trying to convey in the cover letter, be sure to at least highlight that and then maybe reference your cover letter. I know all of you on the line are probably giggling, thinking, well, it's called a cover letter to read before the resume, but you just want to cover your bases. So maybe do that if it's something really critical.
Awesome. Well, we are over our time here, so I can't thank you both enough for your insight, your suggestions, your wonderful ideas. I think the audience got a lot out of it today. I'm so glad we recorded it so everybody else can watch it back, because I think this information was just second to none. So really appreciate Frank and Juanita for your time today. For everybody on the line, just want to let you know that, again, we will follow up with an email. We'll give you all the links we sent out in the chat today. I am going to launch a quick poll. We really take your feedback seriously, so we're always looking to improve our webinars. So if you could just take a quick minute, it's only about 5 questions, give us your feedback for today. Would really appreciate that. And while you're doing that, just want to remind you again that this webinar will be posted the first week of September. So we host 2 webinars per month, and we post them both during the first week of the following month. So it will be posted the first week of September. And then just a reminder that you can register for all of our upcoming webinars at the same link that you registered for this webinar. Our very next one on August 18th, we'll be highlighting 2 of our hiring offices, one that oversees quality improvement and the other that handles all of our appeals, our Office of Hearings and Inquiries. So definitely excited for that webinar, so feel free to register for that. And with that, again, I just want to thank everybody for attending today. Thank you, Frank and Juanita, for your valuable insights and, again, suggestions. And with that, hope we got to most of your questions. I see a few still highlighted, so just want to let you know that we will answer the rest of the questions coming in the Q&A. But at this point, we can now disconnect. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.